These cars were geared to go 140 miles an hour in the desert, jumping dunes. A while back, I did a video on the Porsche 959, kind of talking about where it came from and dispelling a lot of its myths. And during that video, I said they did a race called the Paris Dakar and they won. I said, that's a story for another time. Well, guess what? It's another time. I'm going to tell you about the victory of the Porsche 959 at the Paris Dakar. Now to do that, we got to go back a few years and set it all up for you. And how it started was, well, the Paris Dakar, to tell you what that is an amazing race that started in 1979 and went from Paris, France to Dakar in Senegal in Africa. It ranged in distances from 7,000 to 8,000 miles or almost 9,000 miles over the years that it ran. And it was absolute madness. And it was developed by a guy named Thierry Sabine. And I can only imagine, the conversation over cigarettes and wine. And, he's all like, I got stuck in the desert, which he did. He got stuck in the Sahara Desert. And in his mind, he goes, this might be a great idea for a race. He's all like, let's do a race. Let us start here in Paris. We can have croissant and we can take off and race. Where should we finish? Maybe some place that speaks French. Vietnam. No, that didn't go so well. Who else? What other colony can we choose? I know, Senegal. That sounds good to me. And why not? I mean, the Paris Dakar really was kind of like if the Baja 1000 met Wacky Racers or the 24 Hours of Le Mans met the Cannonball Run and you stretched it out over weeks and thousands of miles. It was insanity. So, of course, a lot of people wanted in, and they were usually the crazy racers. And Porsche had a racer named Jackie Ickx, who at that point had already won 3 Le Mans, and he would go on to win another 3, Mr. Le Mans. And he also was in a Formula One racer, amazing racer. But he had heard about it, and he's all like, yeah, I want in. I can't do a Belgian accent, so I can't do his accent. But I said, I want in, I want to do this. So he grabbed some cars in 81 and 82 and in 83, and he raced with some people, and he got some experience, and eventually won in 83, I believe in a Mercedes. And meanwhile, over at Porsche, they're developing a 4-wheel drive system for a 911. And it didn't start with the 959. Helmut Bott and Peter Falk, who was the head of the racing program, borrowed an Audi Quattro, apparently, and took it to Switzerland or to some event. And they were so impressed by it that in 1981, they got a 911 and they got bits of an Audi Quattro because it's a sister company really. And they put the transmission and transaxle and system into a 911 as this kind of experimental thing and started running it around and then took it down to Africa and ran it around even some more. And they're like, this kind of works. And that was the beginning where the 959 came from. Before the 959, there was another car that was a homologation car that people have forgotten called the 911 SCRS. It eventually would turn into what was called the 953. And the 953 was the RS with a 4-wheel drive system in it. And the 4-wheel drive system wasn't all Porsche. This wasn't the 959 system yet. It was kind of bodged together. And they decided to go to the Paris Dakar in 1984 with a bunch of these 953s. And they had a 3.2 liter engine in the back. And it's not a 959, but it was their first attempt at a 4-wheel drive system in a race. And believe it or not, they won. Ickx was out there. Ickx was the main driver. René Medj was another driver. And then Roland Koosmal, who was the head, basically he was the project manager for all of this, raced the third car. And Medj ends up winning the Paris Dakar, first time out in a 4-wheel drive Porsche. Blew people's minds. And this 1984, I think it was 12,000 kilometers, which is something like 7,600 miles. And to understand what they're going through, I mean, when you look at a map of Africa and you take a globe and you smash it out flat, Africa looks a lot smaller than it actually is. Like the United States would fit inside of the top of Africa a couple of times. I mean, the USSR would fit in there. It's massive. So when you look at it, you're like, oh, they didn't cover that much distance. You're talking thousands of miles across dunes, Rocky surfaces, rocks as big as the cars, and there's no gas stops out in the middle of the Sahara Desert. It is the ultimate test of a car. And it wasn't just cars that were running out there. They were running motorcycles, the trucks, the cars, the support trucks were racing themselves. And they were racing 4x4s, 6x6s, 8x8s were out there. It was just insane. So when Porsche wins in 1984, it's time to finally test the 959. The 959 had been developed over the last couple of years. They were coming to a point where there was going to be a car. The 959, when it came out, was called the Group B. And one of the ideas that was going to be competitive in Group B racing. Group B racing included Group B rally racing, which everybody knows about, the crazy Audi Quattros, the Lancias, and it got shut down in 1986 after they killed a bunch of people because the cars were so powerful and fast. And there was also going to be a road racing element of Group B, which never happened. The 959 never got to do Group B. It really was too heavy, too late to the game. Paris Dakar seemed like the perfect place to put it and test out its four-wheel drive system and see what it could do. So in 1985, they line up 3 959s with an asterisk because they hadn't developed the engine, the 959/50 motor yet, well enough that it could survive, they believed, the grueling race. So they put in the 3.2 liter from the previous year from the 953. It did have the 959 four-wheel drive system, but instead of the electronic controls, it was all manually controlled. I actually got to play with one of the 3 cars that came to the Canopy Museum. I got to sit in it, and it was kind of cool. I mean, so beat up. You realize how destroyed these cars get as they go. 85 didn't go really well. They had a few issues with the cars, and it was interesting. It wasn't the 959 systems that failed, but they had a crash. I think one of the cars, the engine oil just poured out and it died. So by halfway across, all the 959s are dead in the middle of the desert. And that was kind of humiliating, really humiliating. So in 86, they wanted to do it right. And at the end of 85, there was a race called, it was like the Rally of the Pharaohs, I think it was called. They went and they tested the turbo 959 engine finally in the car. My favorite part of that wasn't them running the 2 959s, one which burnt down in the desert. There's a famous picture of a burning down 959. That's where that happened. But they built a support vehicle that was a Mercedes G-Wagon, which they had used the year before, but they felt was too slow, right? Roland was like, no, too slow. So they put in a 928 V8 in it, and they put 959 brakes on this G-Wagon. And if I had to have an old racing vehicle, if I could find this thing, I would totally have it. But then they raced it, and Ix's car burnt down. The Medj car goes forward, and Kussmaul comes in second place in the G-Wagon as the support vehicle for that. So that boded well for 1986. 86 arrives. The Paris Dakar was run in January of every year. So January of 1986 arrives. They have 3 Porsche 959s, and these are very close to production. The four-wheel drive system is now electronic, but it's now selectable by the driver. They have different modes they can put in. So you can vector power front and back. You can control the diffs. It's really insanely advanced. In fact, the four-wheel drive system that was in the 959 really was an advanced system for 30 years. Like, to this day, that is still a benchmark of what they did. Like, it was a moonshot, that car. And to have it out in the desert was amazing. So the main drivers for 1986 were René Medj, Jackie Ix, and Roland Kussmaul. The theory is that you have 2 main drivers. There was Medj and Ix, and Kussmaul's car would be the support car. And they have the big 8x8, and they have the big support vehicles behind them, which have fuel in them, have battery acid, have whatever they need, because the fuel out there is horrible. Expected fuel, maybe 86 octane, sometimes in Africa, 80 octane. So the 959 engine was detuned, normally 450-ish horsepower, detuned about 400, 390, which was significantly higher than the previous year. The 3.2 liter was only putting out like 230, 240 horsepower. So this was a massive gain. These cars were geared to go 140 miles an hour in the desert, jumping dunes. And they would get over 200 kilometers an hour, which is 126, all the time. And that was kind of thing in the car. They would all scream, 200, 200, and they would be flying. By the way, I forgot this, them talking to each other. René Medj didn't speak German, and Roland Kussmaul didn't speak French. So there was a lot of gesticulating, communicating for the teams, and which led to some crazy racing hijinks. But I always thought that was funny. Like, you always think this seamless, perfect team working, but they made it work. So they went out, and it was obvious the 959s were going to do really well. It wasn't that they didn't run into problems. For instance, his car, his exhaust broke in the turbo. Roland comes up behind him and has to offer parts of his 959. They spent all night re-welding in the desert with help from Yamaha, the turbo, and getting it back together. Like, every night you'd have to be rebuilding, they're tearing apart and rebuilding broken parts of the car. They're diving into dunes. The trick is, like, if you hit a dune at speed, you gotta go slow enough over the top to come back. You have no idea where you're going. You can't memorize an 8,000 mile course. I mean, I wish I could have done this back in the day, because it's just insane. Anyway, they had lots of trials and tribulations because each of them had their specialty, obviously. Medj already had won the Paris Dakar. He had done it before. X won it. He had done before. Really, Roland, who was the project manager and driver and engineer, was the real hero that nobody really knows his name, because he was the one who made all of this happen. Because they get to a river in Senegal, and not a lot of them, only Roland had any experience with actual safari driving. The other guys had done a lot of the desert and that kind of thing. When they got to the river, X goes in and gets stuck. Medj just goes in and gets stuck. Then Kussmaul goes and watches the motorcycles go around and figures out how they got through. And then he drives his across the river, uses his car to tow out the two lead cars. Now, this is the support car. And by the way, earlier, the G-Wagon, which was supposed to be one of their support vehicles, died. So all the spare parts from the G-Wagon are jammed in that third car. It is loaded to the gills. They had like 78 gallons of fuel in each of them, 2 spare tires, and he must have been like just sitting amongst car parts, flying over dunes, right? He pulls the 2 of them out. He gets stuck. And X and Medj go on to take first and second place. If he hadn't stopped to help his teammates, which was his job, he would have won, right? But the staggering numbers of this, 488 vehicles started the race. 488 cars left Paris. 67 finished. So to have all 3 959s finish, the odds are extreme. But they came in first, second, and really my favorite part is Roland came in 6th in the support car that was continuously taking parts off and fixing the other ones. They come in 6th place. As much as I love the other guys, Roland Kussmaul, totally my hero. Engineer, project manager, driver, does everything, fixes stuff. Kudos to you. I hope this little video helps bring some fame to your name. Porsche now has had the ultimate victory at the Paris Dakar, proving the 959 is the ultimate supercar. And as a small caveat, later that year at the Le Mans, they take out the racing version of the 959, which is the 961, and it comes in 7th place at Le Mans and wins its class. Even though they had won 1, 2, and 6, they couldn't really celebrate at the finish because Thierry Sabine, the organizer, who was famous for flying in a helicopter along to help support and guide the race and figure things out, had crashed and died along with a few other gentlemen. And that kind of put a pall over the whole finish celebrations. So there wasn't like, popping champagne and corks at the end. And it was a tragedy to lose somebody with that kind of vision. What he left behind, his legacy, lives on today with the Dakar rally that was run in Saudi Arabia.
This month of VINwiki Car Stories is brought to you by Bridgestone. We've talked a lot this year about the Potenza range of tires for sports cars and supercars, but what I'm personally most excited about right now is the Dueler AT Ascent. It is their latest and greatest tire for on-road and off-road capability. I've tried so many tires for my off-road kinds, but this really seems like it's going to be perfect. It's got full-depth interlocking 3D sipes and it is their latest and greatest product, so it should give me all the off-road capability and wet and snow and everything else that I want to put it through, as well as much better road manners. So check them out as well as the whole range of Bridgestone products to find out what's perfect for your ride at the link in the description below, and look forward to more amazing content on VINwiki from Bridgestone.